Hello everybody, my name's Ray, and as for the name of the channel, I love to read. I hope you like the logo. Sam Harrison made that for me. He is a fellow booktuber and he reviews science fiction and fantasy. I will pop his channel down as a link below so you can check out his stuff. Anyway, today's video is about mental health conditions and their representation in fiction. Now, this is not a video that's going to help with your mental health. I'm not going to be talking about any non-fiction. I'm not going to be talking about any self-help books. This is purely about portrayals of mental health in a few works of fiction that I've selected that I think it's done particularly well. And the purpose of this video is to basically bring these books to your attention because I think they're very good portrayals that will increase empathy and spread awareness of certain mental health conditions. There's 4 or 5 of them, and I'll talk you through them. These are some of the best books that I've read over the last decade. Obviously, how we represent and depict mental health conditions is very, very important. Obviously, people with mental health problems suffer from huge amounts of misunderstanding, huge amounts of stigma, and when they're represented in ways that are sensitive and that explain what it's like to be living with these conditions, it can change the way that people think and it can change the way that people view the system, and it's one of the really powerful things that fiction can do. No representation is going to be perfect or universal. Everybody's experience of these conditions is going to be different. So by no means take any of these books as kind of the definitive, this is what it's like to have schizophrenia, this is what it's like to have dementia, this is what it's like to have depression. By no means take them as that. But sometimes if you don't know much about something, it's useful to have a sensitive narrative that can give you an idea or a flavour of what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. So the first book I'd like to talk about is a book called The Octopus Man by Jasper Gibson. Now, this is a very good book and I've not seen it about much on social media. It's one that perhaps didn't get as much recognition as I feel it deserves. Now, it's the second Jasper Gibson book I've read. He wrote a book quite a long while ago called A Bright Moon for Fools, and I don't recommend this book. When I was reading it, I certainly saw Jasper Gibson's potential as a writer. He can be very funny. There is one particular moment in the book that has stuck with me and just cracked me up at the time, and it was, a kind of bittersweet kind of novel with a kind of not anti-hero protagonist, but a very flawed and entertaining main character. But there were tonally jarring bits of the book. For content warning, there was a scene of sexual violence that was not handled sensitively, in my opinion, and it was not necessary, and it was tonally jarring, and I could see what the author was trying to do, but they weren't successful in my opinion. It doesn't mean it's a terrible book. I think I gave it about 2 or 3 stars. It was a debut, and with some editing it could have been, really something. But it did showcase what a kind of entertaining writer Jasper Gibson could be. Now, The Octopus Man, I feel, is much more of a success. He's really, really come along as a writer. And this book is both entertaining and sad and empathic. I believe from the afterword in the book that Jasper Gibson had a relative, I believe it was an uncle, who suffered from either schizophrenia or a psychotic illness of a similar kind. Not the same as the character in the book, but that's where he got the inspiration to write the story from. So The Octopus Man stems around a main character who believes that an octopus god is basically controlling his behaviour and thoughts and things like that. And this is difficult for the main character because he believes that if he behaves and acts in certain ways, then the octopus god is punishing him and hurting him, and he suffers as a result of this. And in a lot of ways, it's a harmless delusion. It's something that he experiences that other people around him don't, but there are ways in which this causes him to be unwell and ill. So we've partly got the kind of, so part of his problem is created by the actual illness itself, because he does suffer from kind of pain as a result of the delusional illness, but also it shows how so much of his suffering doesn't come from the illness itself, but from the environment that he finds himself in and the lack of understanding that comes from the healthcare system that he's in and the people around him, and that lack of knowledge and that lack of empathy. It's a damning critique of psychiatry in general in the UK, and shows how disenfranchised mental health patients can be. And from that point of view, it's a very, very interesting book to read. It doesn't propose a solution to any of these problems. It's a very, very complicated situation, but it is insightful. It's an insightful look at how psychosis can affect an individual, how it can affect his interface with the world, how medication is a double-edged sword, and how it can, cause help in some ways, hinder in others. It's about how people are kind of encouraged to kind of fit in with the world around them rather than the world around them adapting to accommodate their beliefs and experiences. It is such a fascinatingly complex book that hits the nail on the head and doesn't focus on that kind of, here's a person who's ill, oh, they're cured kind of narrative. It doesn't kind of it offers hope without kind of bending the main character to fit in with how the world works. And I would highly recommend this book if you don't know much about schizophrenia. I mean, it's an unusual, like I say, the actual concept of it being an octopus god, it sounds amusing. But it really isn't. It's there are funny moments to the book. There's some observational humour. It's there's a bit of dark humour in there. Jasper Gibson has got a dark sense of humour. This was evident with his first book. But it's I think a very overlooked book that deserves a wider readership. So I would encourage you to pick that one up. The next book I would like to discuss that does an excellent job of portraying someone with a mental health concern is Elizabeth is Missing by Emma Heaney, I believe. Apologies if I've got that name wrong. I'm recording on my phone and that's where I usually look stuff up. But here is the book. Now, Elizabeth is Missing is sort of a mystery novel in a sense. Because it's about this older lady who she is very, very focused on Elizabeth's missing, Elizabeth's gone, Elizabeth's not here. She knows something's wrong. She knows that her friend is no longer there anymore. And she's finding it very, very, it's like a stone in the shoe. She cannot accept that Elizabeth's, I can't remember exactly what the narrative was. I think Elizabeth's died or something like that. I'd have to, but Elizabeth is no longer there, and there is a rational explanation, but that the main character is absolutely certain that Elizabeth's missing, and there's something in the garden, and she's very, very focused on this. And it's told from her point of view. And you can see through her eyes how she's lost her memory and how some of her memories are being confused. And it's very subtle. It's not melodramatically done. It's done in a way that you are in the main character's head. You feel her frustration with her. You can see how it's developing, how she's not quite understanding that she's losing her memory, but that fixation on what's going on with Elizabeth and the interactions with her daughter, who's obviously at her wit's end because she gets the same kind of Elizabeth is missing every day. This is a brilliant book, and you know, it's a lot more, as you find out towards the end, it's a lot more complicated than that, and you do have a past backstory kind of weaving into the narrative there from before, when the character started losing her memory. It's a very, very good portrayal of what it would be like to have dementia, and to be losing one's memory. And it's, you get the frustration from both sides, you get that picture of how difficult it is from both sides, and it's very humanizing. And I think anybody who reads this book will get a better idea of what it's like to kind of live with memory loss, and the frustrations involved with it. And you know, there are twists in there as well. I think that something, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's something that happens towards the end that makes you smile, and that makes you, yeah, it's quite satisfying, and from that point of view. But again, it's one of those books that paints a picture, and it doesn't just focus on the tragedy, it doesn't just focus on the sadness. It's a very accepting, very kind of neutral way of looking at a condition that, you know, affects so many people. And you know, people that I've loved as well. And it's about kind of living with the positive and the negative. And again, it's a fantastic portrayal. So I would highly recommend, in the same way that the Octopus Man, I think, would make people more aware of psychotic illness, Elizabeth is Missing brings a greater understanding to what it's like living with memory impairment. And there's a story in there too, it's not just about that. And same with the Octopus Man, it's, you know, that these are stories that not only kind of discuss the conditions, but they're stories. So very well done, both of them. The third book I would like to recommend to you is, this is a very personal choice. This is a book that I have gifted the most out of probably any book in the world. This is a book called The Bad Doctor by Ian Williams, and it is about a GP, a rural GP in Wales, I believe, who has OCD. And it's, anybody who's ever worked in general practice will be like, yep, that's it's portrayed very well in this book. And also the portrayal of OCD is very good as well. And it doesn't talk about just one kind, because although the doctor suffers from OCD, he also has a patient who does have a different sort, and it brings awareness to the condition in an amusing and more relatable way. This is a graphic novel. I would say it's more of a comic than a graphic novel in a way, because the art is very basic. It's expressive, like the facial expressions on the characters' faces are brilliant. But like I say, it's all black and white, they're just drawings. There is actually a sequel to this book called The Lady Doctor, which goes a little bit more extreme. But again, they're very good. If you want to know what it's like to be a GP in a rural setting, this is a cute little way of kind of getting a bit of background on that. Very entertaining book, and will give you insight into the basics of OCD, and goes some way to debunking you know, what it's actually about, because OCD is a condition that can be about so many things, and people just tend to think about the main versions of it. But it's that obsessional pattern of thinking with kind of compulsive reassurance mechanisms that aren't soothable, that can take over somebody's life. And this is it's a good visual demonstration of that, while still being an amusing comic. So even if you're not interested in the mental health side of things, these are quite funny. The Lady Doctor in particular has some very amusing moments. That one doesn't explore OCD specifically, but the main character definitely has some emotional issues to contend with in that. So yes, I would highly recommend Ian Williams's books. They are good. number 4, and this is the most widely known, it's obviously a classic, and you'll know what it is if I say this is an immersive experience of depression. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This book will make and has made so many women with depression feel seen, because it is a very relatable experience, and it's a classic for a reason. Now, obviously it was written, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s, so unfortunately there is a lot of racism in the book. Attitudes back then were more vocally and overtly racist, and there is a lot of upsetting use of language, so just be wary of that going into it. It's very much of its time and on the background of the 50s, but it's about a young lady, Esther Greenwood, who scores a dream job working, I think, on a magazine, and she's in New York, and she becomes very, very unwell. It's a semi-autobiographical novel, and obviously anyone who knows the story of Sylvia Plath knows that it's a tragic one. It's the only novel that she wrote. Obviously she's primarily known for being a poet, but any list of books, immersive books that focus on mental health and let you understand what it is like to be in the head of somebody who becomes unwell with their mental health, this is a book you cannot miss off the list, because it's absolutely an iconic depiction of depression. There are 2 passages in The Bell Jar that have stuck with me over the years. One is the actual title of the book itself. So the title of the book, The Bell Jar, refers to the author's feeling of, doesn't matter where she is on the planet, she could be lying on a beach in paradise, and she would still be under the bell jar breathing her own stale air. So it's that feeling of hopelessness, and it doesn't matter where I am on the planet, I'm in my own head, I'm in my own and that sense of hopelessness and lack of interactivity with the world around, that lack of that numbness, that anhedonia, that is the absolute kind of quintessential feature of depression, and it's such an apt way of describing it. So the actual title itself is one of the things I remember most from the book, and the other one is a passage that's it's very often quoted, and that's the metaphor of the fig tree. So Sylvia Plath describes Esther as sitting at the base of a fig tree, and all the branches are stretching out above in various different directions with wonderful kind of fruits on the end of them. So one would be a loving relationship and a family, another one would be a successful career or a kind of becoming, I don't know, fluent in a language, or having all these wonderful prizes that you could win if you could just reach out for them, but being so uncertain of what even to do, that you basically just stay paralyzed and sit starving in the middle of the tree, not going for any particular branch because you can't give up the rest of them. And that is such a relatable image, that kind of yearning for so much and therefore reaching for so little because it's so overwhelming. And it's an amazing paragraph. If you look up Sylvia Plath bell jar fig tree quote, you'll have the actual quote in itself. But I know that this book has helped a lot of people feel seen, and it's going to continue to be read. And I won't talk any further about it because obviously there are people out there who haven't read it yet, and I want you to go in with fresh eyes and have your own experience with it. So the 5th book I'm going to talk about is a book, again, this is a popular one, this is a popular bestseller, and it's a bestseller for a reason, because it is a good book, and that book is Eleanor Oliphant is Absolutely Fine. I think it's called Absolutely Fine. Oliphant, she's okay. Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, here we are. It is a book by Gail Honeyman? I'm blanking again and my phone is there. So yeah, this book is brilliant. It is very funny. It is very sweet, but it tackles some big issues. Now, the mental health aspect of this book is twofold. So Eleanor Oliphant suffers from deep trauma. And so this is a book about trauma. It's a book about how that trauma can affect a person throughout their life. But also, Eleanor Oliphant is clearly neurodivergent. And I believe that the author has said, because a lot of kind of depictions of autistic characters, the authors say, no, they're not. I wasn't writing an autistic character, and I don't know if that's true, or if that's because obviously if they're not autistic themselves, they don't want to be misrepresenting autistic folks, but they still want to write about these interesting characters, and Eleanor Oliphant is clearly missing out on certain social cues, and she is very literal, very the way she interacts with the world around her, she takes things at face value, and she doesn't necessarily know always what's socially appropriate. Her mind doesn't make those leaps that sometimes are done instinctively by others. And I read a review, I did read a review on Goodreads that was disapproving and saying that we're laughing at Eleanor. We are certainly not. This book, the underlying thing that I got out of this book was a message of kindness. A message of, if somebody says something inappropriate, if somebody says something socially inappropriate or that might seem a little bit rude or a little bit off, they might just be following a different narrative. They might just not quite understand, or not quite get it. There might not be any malice behind it, and that we should just be accepting. And it was laughing at the ridiculousness of society, the ridiculousness of the rules that we have, and some of the little rules that we all follow unquestioningly, that those little cultural rules, and how ridiculous some of them are. For example, not being people. The idea of fashion and not being able to cart around your little, your very, very practical bag is somehow seen as uncool in a young person, and all of that cultural expectation. It satirizes it, and all these daft little things that we follow, and it does a really good job of that, I believe. Eleanor Oliphant is a very, very complicated character. Some people don't see her as autistic, and that's absolutely fine. Some people don't see her as neurodivergent, and that's a perfectly reasonable reading. Everybody is different, but regardless, obviously, she has some kind of difficulty in engaging with the world around her, and she's a great character. And we do delve in the second half of the book in particular deeply into her trauma. Obviously this has had a hugely complex effect on her life, and my take from it, we are not laughing at Eleanor, we are laughing at the situations that she finds herself in as a result of weird social expectations. And it's a heartwarming book, and like I say, the main message I took away from this book is be kind to people. You don't know what people have been through. You don't know what they're going through now. Give people the benefit of the doubt, and just try and be kind, and try and understand people for who they are, and as individuals. And I think that's hugely important. So that's why that book's on my list. Treating people who've been through a lot, and it's had an impact on their mental health and their kind of way that they move through life. And finally, that was I said 4 or 5, didn't I? There are 6. I'm you can stop now. You can stop now. If you feel like you've got what you came for. But I'm going to talk about a 6th book, and that they have made, I believe, into a Netflix series very recently, and that is the Outrun by Amy Liptrot. Now, this is the only book on the list that is non-fiction. Obviously there are autobiographical elements in Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, but this one is actually a non-fiction book. It is a memoir about a lady who is suffering from alcohol dependence, and to whom alcohol has had a hugely negative impact on her life. And she goes away to where she grew up in Orkney, on one of the Orkney Islands, and goes to recover and to find herself again, and to move past a life where alcohol has been a huge part of her life. And this book is a very, very, very good depiction of what it can be like when alcohol becomes a problem. And it also just shows how much of a huge cultural role it plays within our society, and how difficult it can be, and how excluded you can feel if you don't, like I say, if you don't drink, and if you're unable to, because of, you know, the impact it has on your health and behaviour. So it was interesting how the author talks about the societal impact of drinking culture, and how she's always taken things, she was always the person who took things a little bit too far, who, you know, didn't know when to stop, and, you know, it became a problem within her life and something that was affecting her health and well-being. And it's not just a book about that, it's a book about nature. It's a book about how she found herself reconnecting with nature out in the wild, in the remote island setting. And yeah, it's just a beautiful piece of writing. So obviously substance abuse can hugely affect someone's mental health and well-being, and this is a good portrayal of, you know, of how difficult it can be, and, you know, and how difficult it can be to give that up and to find a life for yourself after, without those things that are that you're compulsively seeking out to make yourself feel okay. So like I say, that would be another book I would highly recommend if you want to have more empathy with people who suffer from various different conditions. So yes, that's a little tour of what's available out there to read in fiction. Now obviously there's going to be loads more. I have some books on my list that I'm intending to read soon, and, you know, if I get enough books together, then hopefully I can do a part 2 for you. But hope I've given you some food for thought there. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And if you think there's any books out there of a similar kind of that do a similar kind of job, that improve awareness, please let me know in the comments what you think they are. There might be that I've missed some that I've already read. It might be that I need to add them to my TBR. Anyway, it's been great to spend some time with you. Happy reading!